Hello, folks. Welcome back to the podcast. This is episode 25, doing a special bonus episode outside of having my regular guests on that are scheduled. This is all about Britt West Hancock football and the championship game coming up this Thursday, the 18th at 1 o'clock at the Dome. Unless you're living under a rock, you probably know that we won our semifinal game 37-0 against East Buchanan. That gets us to our 8th state championship game in school history. So the three of us thought it'd be fun to do kind of a state championship podcast episode. So here we go. How we feeling, guys? What are you guys feeling leading up to championship week?
Feel really good. Kind of deja vu as it's the third year in a row between West Hancock and Grundy Center. So couldn't think of a better place for these two teams to match up, though.
Yeah, this is it's going to be fun. I always look forward to these games, especially we played them 3 times in 3 years, and it'll be a fun game.
Yep. And Jay starts basketball in the morning, and not very many kids will be at practice because of football, so he's going to have to lace up the Nikes
Sneakers
out there and show them how it's done. And then
hopefully I still got some ACLs by the end of the week.
yeah. Any of them, PCLs, MCLs, you name it. And then Kevin's a Grundy alum, so there's a little extra twist in that as well for him. So yeah, so the format we're gonna do here is we're gonna talk about each of the 7 previous state championship games a little bit, just kind of give that historical context, and then we're gonna break down West Hancock. We're gonna break down Grundy Center and give some predictions just for fun at the end. So here we go. I did this a little bit in the first podcast we did, but the playoffs started in 1972 with 4 classes and only 4 teams per class. We, Britt, before it was West Hancock, made the playoffs in 1973, so the second year of the playoffs. We were in Class 2A back then. In the first round, we beat Postville 36-8, and then with just 4 teams, that's considered a first round game. That gets you into the championship game. That championship game was in Iowa City at Kinnick Stadium, where we played Mount Vernon, and that was the first of Coach Sanger's 3 state titles. We won that game 34-13, and the one story that I kind of go back to in that game was the fact that the game almost didn't happen. John Swenson was telling me about that, how they were almost late to the game, didn't get leaving early enough, had to do quick warm-ups and get going, and that was the reason why when I was a head coach at Southeast Warren, I'd take my kids to the game 2.5 hours early, because I'm like, well, Coach Sanger did it, must be a reason. And it was because he almost didn't get a coach in his first ever state championship game. So Bob Swears had 254 rushing yards that game and 3 touchdowns. He also caught a touchdown pass from Jim Deemer, and it was kind of an anomaly of a game because typically it was our passing game that stood out. Jim was only 3 for 11 passing for 59 yards in that game. And Rick Klein, who holds most all of our receiving records, didn't even catch a pass that game. But it didn't really matter at the end, even though it was 0-0 into the first quarter. We were up 6-0 at half, and then kind of exploded at the end there in the second half, scored 3 times in the fourth quarter. And they scored twice, but didn't really matter at that point. This team only got to play 10 games, so it's a little hard to compare the championship teams to the 96 team and the 2019 team, because they had 3 less games than those guys did. So then the podcast I did with that team, I asked them about their post-game celebration, and they all smiled and said that they couldn't tell me what they did because it was a PG podcast. So love to hear some stories from those guys down the line about that. Yeah, here we go. Let's break down the Eagle offense, guys. What are you guys thinking offensively for West Hancock going into the game against Grundy Center?
I'll let you start it off, Kevin.
All right. I think we saw some diversity. Eagles have come out a lot this year with that shotgun formation and Mitchell Smith, and that's a game changer for a lot of the games that we've been in the last couple of games. That adds some diversity that a lot of teams aren't prepared for, because they're used to our coming out and just running our wing tee and playing smash mouth football. And I don't think that game plan for smash mouth football has really changed, but Mitchell in that position really adds a lot of diversity as far as being able to run the ball as that extra blocker, and even a pass out of that has proved to be pretty beneficial for our offense. So Matthew Francis has come along, done really well. He's leading Class A well, I think he's leader right now, 1,800 yards on the season.
Mhm.
And Kane Zool has come along. He's recorded 1,000 yards in his career now, and the two quarterback system has worked really fine. Some teams probably couldn't do that, but Coach Sanger has really done a good job of managing the offense with those two quarterbacks.
What do you think?
I would agree with Kevin. I think the way West Hancock, when they do go to that spread formation, it opens it up even for when they go back to their just routine stuff, their wing tee and their full house look. Just because teams are used to game planning, wanting to stack the box, get in there and kind of throw punches with us. And when we go to that formation, we're still trying to do the same thing from a principle standpoint. We're trying to run the football, a lot of power runs with Mitchell at the quarterback position and maybe get Matthew on the edge. But one thing with that, when we do go to that, they cannot stack the box based on now teams have enough film of seeing that formation. They have to respect the pass game just because that connection is there between Mitchell and mostly Ryland Barnes. And he's shown a few times now that he can hurt you deep. I know looking at some stats that I've gotten written down here, half of the catches that Ryland's got this year have gone for touchdowns. He's got 12 catches and 6 of them have gone for touchdowns. So you've got to respect that. But then just like we saw against East Buchanan, West Hancock went back to I call it the standard Sanger offense in the second half. And after not being able to do much with that offense in the first half, they went back to it in the second half, and it was all of a sudden they were rolling again. I'd really like to look offensively. I'd like to go back and look at Matthew Francis second half yards per carry, because my guess he's probably a yard and a half better in the second half per carry. And that's due to a ton of different things. One is just the physicality that we play with in our offensive line and the physical running back that Matthew is. So he has a tendency just to wear teams down and punish them. Kevin and I talk about using the boxing analogy all the time. It's body blows, and those wear teams out eventually. But I think West Hancock has done a really good job this year, especially with this new Wild Mitch formation of being very, very multiple in their run game. They can hurt you in a lot of different ways, and defenses have to respect it.
Yep, definitely. And were you guys a little surprised it was only 8-0 at halftime? Me personally, I was like, we're up 8-0. They're a score away from tying the game, but it didn't feel that close to me. I felt like we took a few blows and that we gave up a few plays here and there, but at the end of the day, I felt pretty good going into halftime up 8-0. I was like, all right, I think that comes down to the defense. We'll get to in a little bit as well.
Yeah, I felt the same way as you, Dan. Like I thought, it's halftime. They were kind of controlling the time of possession game though in the first half, but I know Kevin would say the same thing, and Dan, you too. I have the utmost confidence of our coaches going into halftime and making the right adjustments, or figuring out, okay, what was working, what wasn't working, what's gonna be our go-to in the second half. And they came out. That second half was probably one of the most dominant, cleanest second halves you could ask for from a football team. Basically, offense, defense, special teams. They were on point in all three phases.
Yep.
I would say I agree with Jay. The second half adjustments, or halftime adjustments, I should say. You got a coaching staff that most of them have played in the college game. They really do a good job of breaking down other people's defenses and what's there and what isn't. And without giving away what their second half adjustment was last week, it's just a simple little thing that they come out of the locker room and did that made a huge difference in the third quarter. And they'll tell you that too. But I think that's one of the strong points of our coaching staff is making halftime adjustments. I think that was a strong point of Bob's also when he was at the helm, and that's why these guys are good at it, because they learned from him, and he was very good at that, just making a halftime adjustment. And it might be a simple little thing that really can turn the game around. And our third quarter last week was just dominant, and that was a difference in the game in my mind.
Yep. And
yeah,
go ahead, Jay.
I was going to say, I would echo on one thing that's very underrated in coaching is making adjustments on the fly, right? Like at halftime, it's easy to make an adjustment in a football game or a basketball game after the game, after you go back and watch the film and you think, oh shoot, I should have done this, or we should have done this, but they're doing it on the fly. And like Kevin said, you have a lot of guys that are played college football, and I think maybe more importantly, you have a bunch of guys that have been through that program and know what adjustments to make within that offense and within blocking schemes. And they're all probably looking at the same thing, and they're probably all the coaching staff as a group. They may be all thinking it the same, after they get into halftime. Hey, let's tighten this up, or let's take this step on our first block. Things like that, just little tweaks, and it helps to have all those coaches on the same page and just that general coaching continuity. I wouldn't even imagine what the combined years are if you combine how long they've been in the program as a player and then as a coaching staff. It's probably a pretty big number.
Yeah.
Dan, you can look at.
As a guy who played for Coach Sanger, I do remember at halftime a lot of games we'd go into the locker room and he'd be like, okay, on the 45 dive when we're blocking this guy, I want you to do this instead. He'd tell it was like one person to do one thing different.
Yep.
It made a ton of difference. And then I think a lot of it comes down to anticipating what the other team's going to adjust as well.
Yep.
And that was, we always say Coach Sanger forgot more about football than we'll ever know. And a lot of that's been passed down to his staff who played for him and has coached with him as well. So, and speaking of Coach Sanger, here we go. After that 1973 season, Britt, Hancock didn't make the playoffs again until 1984. But we had some respectable teams between 73 and 84. The 1981 team was 7-1, lost Osage by 2. Had some 4-4, 5-3 teams. But then in 84, like we've talked about before, is when Britt really went on that playoff tear that we still know about today, that we still talk about, and that we're still seeing in the championship game in 2021. Since 1984, there have been 38 seasons of Eagle football, and we've qualified for the playoffs in 31 of those 38 seasons. And of those 7 non-playoff seasons, we were 6-2, 7-2, 7-2, 7-2. And we had a couple down years, 2-7, 3-6, and 0-9. But of those 7 seasons, 4 of them were very close to being playoff teams as well. Just kind of mind-boggling stats there, including since 1984, we're 318-94 as a program. That's 8.3 wins to just 2.47 losses a season, which is just hard to maintain that kind of success in a small school, but we've done it. So 1986 and 1987 we played in the 1A class, or the class 1A state championship games. Those seasons we didn't blow a ton of teams out, a lot of close games, we won them all. We came into the class 1A title games both years with an 11-0 record. In 86, the year I was born, we played Linville Sully in that title game in our first time in the Dome. We lost 12-7. We had 157 yards rushing, 119 yards passing. Tony Boothroyd was the quarterback that day. It was a 4:30 kick. This week's game is going to be a 1 o'clock kickoff. Linville struck first, scoring to take a 6-0 lead into the half. They scored again in the third to make it 12-0, and we scored in the fourth, but it was a little too late. That touchdown was on a Tony Boothroyd to Mark Hulk 32-yard pass. And then Vance Hagen, our spotter up in the press box, kicked the extra point. And he still, I think, owes me a steak dinner, by the way, for making him the answer of a trivia question. But I'll talk to him about that later. And then in 1987, we made it back to the Dome and then squared off against Grundy Center. First of 3 championship games now against Grundy. And then also some other playoff games. We lost that game to Grundy 19-7. At half, we were down 12-7. And then they added one more score to put it out of reach in the second half. We only had 133 yards of offense in that game, but Grundy only had 155. So played great defense, just couldn't capitalize on that defensive effort. The only score came on a Pat Kelly 3-yard touchdown run, and then Kevin Sanger kicked the extra point in that one to give us our 7 points. They also made the Dome in 88, played Grundy again, lost 14-7. So that's 3 of our first 7 championship games, not counting this year. All right, Jane, Kevin, how about the Eagle defense? This is kind of our strong point this year, and I hope people don't get tired of talking about our defense, because it's I think a once in a 30-year defense we're looking at right now. So what do you guys think?
Well, I don't get tired of talking about the defense because I think it's fun. Defense wins championships. I've been saying that all along, all season long, and I'm not the only one that says that. Right now, they're the top ranked defense. These are taking off of the BC Moore as far as points given up. I think they're down to looking on Jay's notes here that he sent to me, just under 4 points, 3.8 points a game that they're giving up. And the impressive thing for me is until these last couple of games, they have not given up. They were just being really frugal and giving up defensive yardage. I think we're giving up right around 150 yards a game to the opponents. I think the cool thing that we saw, and Jay will say this too, because it was very impressive against East Buchanan the last game. East Buchanan, after a big, like 64-yard pass play, had a 1st and goal on the Eagle 3-yard line.
Mm-hmm.
And they turned it over on downs after they did have a penalty in there, but they turned it over on downs back at the 12-yard line. And I joked with Logan Lear. I saw him Saturday morning at his job up at the hardware store. And I said, I owed him an apology because I joked with Kane Zool about it too. The next day I said, well, you guys an apology because I said on the radio that Logan Lear run the guy down and made a touchdown saving tackle. And the phrase I used was for now. And we joke about it now is what I probably should have said is just a touchdown saving tackle. Cause Jay and I both thought, well, they've got a 1st and goal on the 3. We're going to give up 6 points here. And they didn't think that at all. And that's the mindset that this defense has. And that's what I think makes them as good as what they are.
Yep.
I would agree with that, Kevin. I think it's all about mindset for this team, and that was the perfect example of it. I talked to some of the kids tonight after practice, and we spoke about that 60-yard pass play, and they all said to a man, they're not scoring a touchdown, and whether that's false confidence or straight confidence, whatever, it works, and they just have it's an attitude, it's a grittiness that they've got about them. And I know Mark said it a lot in some of his quotes. It's just a team that's willing to sacrifice individual glory for the team. And so they do their job. They do their assignment, whether that's like John Martinez, like Kevin, I think Brady texted us this week. John Martinez probably hasn't gotten enough credit. He has played terrific, especially in this playoff run and especially on last Thursday against East Buchanan. He doesn't have a role where he's going to put up huge numbers as a defensive end, but he's setting the edge every time, letting those linebackers run, letting Rylan and Mitchell and Matthew and Kane make a lot of tackles. And it's guys like that. And it's a whole team of players like that that are just kind of putting the team ahead of themselves. And that's what makes this defense so good, is that grit and that attitude they have. And then if you have a team that's got that mental makeup and then you put a bunch of athletes on that team, well, then you have the recipe for a really, really special season. And that's what they're having defensively. I mean, they're giving up less than just over 150 yards of total offense per game. They give up less than 4 points a game. I mean, the numbers are just ridiculous. Kevin and I talked about it, and I don't know if we said it on the podcast the first time we were on, but West Hancock, our first string offense, first string defense, has only given up 2 touchdowns this year, and that was in weeks 1 and week 2. If the whole first team defense is in, those are the only touchdowns they've given up this year. So it's just incredible what they've been able to do. And credit to the players, credit to the coaching staff. It's a really, really fun group to watch. And I hope we realize, looking back on the season, whatever happens on Thursday, how special of a group that defensive side of the football is.
Yeah. And I would add too, what you have said is when that second group of defenders are in there, that first team, they don't just take a break out there. They're rooting on that second team, and they want to keep that going. Yeah, it's fun to watch.
Yep, and the stat guy in me is like, oh, I wish we would have kept the shutout, but I'm like, those guys are getting such quality reps, and I have a stat in the book now that's consecutive quarters giving up less than double-digit points, so 0 to 9 points. We have not given up more than 10 or more points in a quarter since the last COVID playoff game before HMS in 2020. So it's been 56 consecutive quarters that we've not given up 2 scores in a quarter is just unbelievable. And then crazy enough, that's only about halfway to the all-time school record. Some of those Steve Everett teams back in the 60s posted like 110 consecutive quarters without giving up double digits in a quarter. So
That's like talking about pitching during the dead ball era, as Kevin's got his baseball stuff up behind him. Throw those numbers out.
Yeah, it's fun though. And one player I want to throw out that you guys didn't yet on defense is Alex Marks. I've really enjoyed watching him improve from last season. He takes up a ton of space, and he gets some penetration up the middle and occupies a few guys, lets the linebackers do their jobs. And then he's not on the offensive line, so he's fresh, and it just helps with depth and keeping guys fresh, especially in the dome. And then Irvin Gomez comes in on those like 3rd and long pass situations and does a nice job. They're a nice duo up front there.
That's my favorite substitution that we have when we go. Marks comes off the field at 300 plus pounds, and then Irvin sprints in there at defensive tackle. I can't imagine what the center, the guard are thinking. They got big Alex, the lunchbox is what I call him, lining up over him, and then on 3rd and long, they got little Irvin who's quick as a hiccup, trying to get around him. So kind of crazy.
Biter. Yep. All right, dog's excited too for the defense. All right, so while Jay's taking care of the pup, we made it back to the championship game in 1993. This time we were back up in 2A. Again, we faced off against Mount Vernon, and this was one of those all-time heartbreakers that we've all talked about in the past. We lost that game 22-21 after having a 21-0 lead at halftime. This was the one where we were in Coach Sanger's office watching it one day, and he walked in and not very kindly told us to take that tape out and never put it back in the VCR again. It was one of those games. We put up 14 in the first quarter, 7 in the second quarter. Justin DeLeon scored on a 9-yard run. Then Nate Smith scored on an 8-yard run. And then Randy Lamfer's pass to Dan Cooper rounded out the scoring, like I said, all in the first half. That was an 11-yard pass. Juan Hernandez booted all 3 extra points. He has a school record for extra point percentage. And then the late, great Paul Jen, Doc's son, had 2 tackles for loss in that game. The wheels fell apart in the second half. Like we said, Mount Vernon scored 6 in the third quarter and then 16 points in the fourth to win the championship by 1 against West Hancock. Just a heartbreak of a game, and that put Coach Sanger at 1-3 in state championship games. But luckily, we made it back to the Dome in 95, lost in the semis to Sigourney Keota. And then 1996, we kind of broke the Dome curse and beat Wapsie Valley in the semis to make it to our 5th state title game in school history, where we took on Lamar's Galen, who won the Class A title in 1995. So they went from A to 1A. We went from 2A to 1A. What are you laughing at?
Oh, my wife's behind the camera right now.
Thought I did something wrong. It could have been. Yeah. So that 96 team did a podcast with some of those guys. We won the game on a field goal by Ben Bergman to win it 17-14. And it was at the time the only field goal in West Hancock playoff history until about, 3 weeks ago when Casey Lamoureux booted one in against South O'Brien in the second round. But in this 96 game, we were up 14-3 at half, held on to win after Galen tied it at 14 in the fourth quarter. We only had 216 yards rushing that game and 0 passing yards. We've talked about this before. Chad Klein went 4 playoff victories without ever completing a pass, which is, to me, just the greatest example of West Hancock football. But it's also fun to see right now that we have a different offense and we can pass the ball and be a little diversified. But just always fun to give Klein a hard time about that. Klein scored on a 2-yard run in that game, and then Jeremy Heyer scored on a 67-yard touchdown run. This was also the game where I was 10, and I woke up that morning sick as a dog. My mom won't let me go to the game. My dad recorded it for me, and I pretty much wore out that VHS tape, and I think it got thrown away at some point. So, but that was kind of that team everyone talked about when I was growing up, and everybody knew about, and their names are in the record book many, many times. And being a 10-year-old kid, that team meant a lot to me, and I was hoping we'd get another championship in the near future, and we did 23 years later. So we'll get to that one here in a little bit. All right, let's break down Grundy Center. I did some Grundy Center playoff history. This is their 14th trip to the playoffs, which doesn't seem like a lot because they have quite a few championships and championship game appearances, but they kind of went in spurts as to when they made the playoffs. And we'll have to figure out how old Kevin is based on if he played or not in any of these games, and then we'll do some math here quick. So we'll see.
I'll tell you no. I'll tell you up front, it's no.
So I'm not going to say you're old, but here we go. Here we go. Grundy made the playoffs in 83, 84, 87, 88, 91, 92, 93, 94. And then they did not make the playoffs again until 2011, then 2013, 2015, and then 19, 20, and this year, 21, all state championship game appearances. They also won state championships in 84, 87, and 1988. Like I said, this is their third straight year in the Class A finals, runner-ups the last 2 seasons. Of all those playoff appearances, they have 5 qualifier trophies, 2 second-round trophies, and a semifinal trophy, and they're 23-10 in playoff games. So just to give you a little historical background of Grundy Center in the playoffs. All right, Kevin, as a GC alum, what do you remember? Do you remember much about those teams from the 80s for Grundy?
Well, I remember the 83 team was the first team to make the playoffs. I was been a senior that year. And the more memorable season probably was the year after I graduated from high school when they won their first state championship. They faced off Emmitsburg. Went through Mount, won a close game with Starmont 7-6 in an overtime game, and then had Ackley Geneva game in there in one of those 2 years. I don't remember which. They were always a rival. I think that was my senior year. They were always a big rival of ours. Mm-hmm. And then went down to Mount Vernon, beat a good Mount Vernon team 25-0. Took on Wapsie Valley, beat them, and then in the championship game took on Emmitsburg and ended up beating them 21-14. Mike Stumberg had a couple, if you remember, Coach Heeman that was at West Hancock for a couple of years. He was faced off against Mike Stumberg, and Mike got around him and sacked their quarterback. If I remember correctly, it was the last 2 plays of the game. They were desperate to get in the end zone, and Mike made 2 big plays in a row. And saved the victory for the home team.
And didn't Stumberg play at Central? I remember
yes,
that name. He was a good player there too. So
yeah, there's been a number of Grundy Center players that have played at Central, and that's interesting that West Hancock has a Central connection, a strong Central connection, and so does Grundy Center.
Yep, definitely go Dutch.
Yeah, a lot of similarities when you kind of peel back the layers between these 2 programs, and that Central connection is one. Dan, I didn't realize. I knew that they had some success, but you said they were 24-10 in the playoffs.
23-10. Yep.
Great record for them. So when they make the playoff, they make a nice run usually. This year's team is no different. I mean, you said it. This will be their 3rd year in a row in the title game, and it should be a heck of a matchup.
Yep, definitely. Either way, one of these teams is going to walk away with a 4th state title. That we have 3, they have 3, and it's been a little longer since they've gotten one than since we have. But either way, someone's walking away with the 4th championship. So I talked about the '96 team. It took 15 years to get back to the state championship game, but we made it back in 2011. This time in Class A. In those 15 years in between title games, though, we made it to the semis, the first round, the quarters. First round, quarterfinals, semis, and the quarterfinals again. And a couple of those games, especially in the semifinals, we had some pretty good chances to make it back to a championship game. One thing Kevin Sanger and I were talking about doing in a future podcast was kind of a what if category in a historical podcast of like, if this would have happened, we would have been in the championship game. If this would have happened, we would at least been 1 round farther. So we're talking about our 8th state championship game where honestly, we could have been in 10, 12, 15 of them in those woulda, coulda, shoulda situations. So it's always fun to talk about. But the 2011 team was led by the Schlugger boys. My brother came to the semifinal game And he's played against those teams, and he goes, yeah, we just called it Schlugger left, Schlugger right, Schlugger middle, stand up, and notice that they scored a touchdown after the fact. So he remembers well this team. But at the 2011 finals, we played Lisbon and lost 14-12. And like we've talked about in the past, we were one Gerardo Ibarra non-broken leg away from a game-winning field goal, more than likely. No one scored in the first quarter in this game. Both teams put up 6 in the second quarter. We scored 6 more in the third to take the lead, and then Lisbon scored in the third, got a 2-point conversion, put them up 14-12 going into the fourth. We got inside the red zone and couldn't punch it in. And like I said, if Gerardo was healthy, we are pretty confident he would have made a nice little chip shot field goal to win it. But it wasn't our day. It was a close game, and another one of those that kind of hurts, and you still think about what could have it been. And then from 2012 to 2018, we made it to the second round, first round, quarterfinals, and then the semifinals in 2018. That's another one of those games we were literally inches away, I think, from going back to the state championship game. We returned pretty much everybody except a couple main seniors from that team for 2019. And that 2019 team, we know, steamrolled their way through the regular season, most of the playoffs until the state championship game, our 7th in school history. And the opponent, Grundy Center. Rematch of the 1987 title game. And again, it was our first championship in 23 years. People will point out the whole 73 to 96 to 2019, 23 years apart on each title win. This was Coach Sanger's third and last title and his last game as a head coach before he passed away on February 5th of 2020. In that 2019 game, we had 420 yards of offense, so easily our best offensive output in a championship game. 388 of those were on the ground, 63 carries. Those are both Class A records in a championship game. Tate Hagan had all 3 touchdowns for West Hancock. They were all on short runs after nice drives. But Grundy Center actually scored first in that game to go up 7-0. And then we put up 14, and Grundy put up 3 in the second quarter to give us a 14-10 halftime lead. And this is one of those games where I'm like, I did not feel comfortable at any point in that game that we were going to keep that lead. We each scored 7 in the third, and then the fourth quarter was scoreless to give us a 21-17 win. They had some chances. There was a couple calls on each side that, certain fans weren't real happy with, and depends on which side you're sitting on. But they had one last drive to score and win it, and dropped a 4th down pass to seal it for us to win the game. And then, like we've talked about, mostly remember them just running that trophy down to Coach Sanger in the press box, and he went out a winner. It was quite a day. So let's get to Grundy Center. What do you guys think about Grundy, watching them at the Dome on Thursday against Woodbury Central?
I would say very, very impressive team, very impressive defense this year. Very similar to the last couple of years we've seen them. One thing with Coach Zajac, it just seems like they're a very well-organized, well-coached team in all 3 phases what they're doing. I don't think they're as big front on the offensive line as they have been in years past, but they've got playmakers. They've got that quarterback is still there, Logan Knack. He was starting against us in the championship game as a sophomore. This will be his 3rd championship game appearance. And he's a playmaker. He can do it all, does it with his legs. From the quarterback position, he can be really dangerous, both scrambling to throw the ball or scrambling to find some running lanes downfield. So he's kind of the head of the snake. Running back, Zinkula's a good size running back. Kevin, you can let me know if I just butchered that name or not. But
No, you're doing great, buddy.
Okay. He's really good running back. And then defense is as impressive as our defense has been this year. Grundy Center's a close second behind. They give up, let me look at my notes here, just 4.3 points per game, but their defense has been terrific all year too. Brandon Sawyer's a kid that he played quite a few minutes when we played him in the state title game. He's a really good linebacker, but they're good in all 3 phases, and they're going to be a really, really tough team for us to beat.
And I would echo almost everything Jay said. Their defense is really good. They've forced 30 turnovers this year. on defense. They've got 5 special team touchdowns. The linebackers for them are, they're comparable to our linebackers. If you look at the 3 but their leading tacklers, excuse me, 2 of the 3 leading tacklers are linebackers for them. Cole Sock has recorded 74 tackles on the season, and he's just a sophomore too, by the way. And then Braden Sawyer and Zinkula are right there with almost 60 apiece for themselves. I would reiterate what Jay said, that I don't think they're as big up front as what they were when we played them in the 2019 championship. But they're just as prolific on offense. And I was working on the pregame stuff tonight just a little bit, and I think if my memory serves me correct, Logan Kanawha has 26 of their 40 offensive touchdowns, if I'm not mistaken, or something like that. It was a sizable number of their offense, or amount of their touchdowns on offense go through the quarterback position. So I think the key for us going forward on that is probably keeping him enough pressure that he's not be able to make accurate throws, and then trying to keep him from put a spy on him so he doesn't run downfield every time we flush him out of the pocket.
Yep. That's where he's dangerous, because you want to take away his passing abilities, but as soon as you put pressure on him, he can sidestep you and move around, and
yeah, he's really good.
Big yards.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. The biggest thing that I worry about in this game, and I was talking with Logan Lear, was he stopped in the gym to talk after practice tonight, and it's not him scrambling to run downfield, it's him scrambling to find a receiver. So then our secondary's got to try to cover guys for 5, 6, 7 seconds. That's really hard to do, and that's where you can give up a big play or two. And that's going to be one of my keys to this game is our secondary is going to be put in those situations every once in a while. There's going to be times where he's scrambling and we just can't get home and get him to the ground, and our secondary and linebackers are going to have to step up in a big way and run and cover and not let guys get behind them. But yeah, there's very similar, like going back to the West Hancock Grundy Center thing. Like if you go back to 2019, there was 3 sophomores on each team that played significant minutes in those championship games in 2019. On our side, it was Francis, Walk, and Zool played significant minutes, and then on their side, Kanawha, Sawyer, and Whitehill all played significant minutes in the championship game. So a lot of really good leadership. But yeah, Grundy Center, terrific team, and I think it's going to be I think this time around it's going to be a defensive battle, very similar to last year's football game.
Yeah. Were you guys a little surprised with the Woodbury Central result? We kind of talked it's going to be a close game, and I think some of the talk was even Woodbury would be almost favored in that game based on their style of play. But I felt like Woodbury almost panicked pretty early in the game and just said, we need to start just chucking it 40 yards down the field every time. And Grundy's on defense to
echo that. I thought going into this, and Kevin did too, that it would be a really evenly matched game as far as kind of a toss-up of who would win. But I think in the end, it was experience that won it for Grundy Center. I go back to, we were sitting there, and the Woodbury was down 7-0. They were driving the ball down. They were at about the 20-yard line, right inside the red zone pretty much. And their quarterback dropped back to pass, kind of panicked in a way. And it was one of those moments where you, as a coach, you say, hey, sometimes it's okay to take a sack. And their quarterback kind of panicked and threw it late over the middle, and it went 7 the other way. And that was when Zinkula took one back 88 yards for a touchdown. All of a sudden it was 14-0. And after that, Woodbury kind of went into, I don't know if panic mode would be the right phrase for it, but they just kind of got out of their game plan and started making some mistakes trying to play catch up. But that goes back to that one play made, I thought, all the difference in that football game. It could have very easily been 7-7 in the second quarter, and all of a sudden it's 14-0, and the game got flipped on its head.
Yeah, and you never want to discredit, a team making plays like Grundy did on those interceptions, but you give away that pick six and you take away some good field position, and it could have been a pretty tight game. It would have been interesting to see how that would have played out. But yeah, Woodbury kind of got out of their game plan and tried to get rid of that deficit all on one play instead of just keeping to their game, which we all know that that's what's going to get you back caught up, is just sticking with what you know how to do, not getting out of character. So yeah, like we said, this is our 8th state championship game appearance. And I'm like, that's a lot of championship games. So, of course, I'm going to go back into the record book on the Athletic Association site. So I found that only 12 other schools have been in 8 or more state championship games. And that includes Valley, Dowling, Solon, West Lyon, Madrid, trying to think of a few off the top of my head, Regina, pretty elite company, Bettendorf, were a bunch of those teams. Pretty cool that West Hancock's name shows up in that list. And only 16 schools have won 4 or more titles. So either way, whoever wins this game is going to join that list. And then our 4 runner-ups is tied for 10th all-time in terms of runner-ups. Our 32 playoff appearances is tied for 7th in state history for most playoff appearances. And only 11 teams have more than the 52 playoff wins that Britt and West Hancock have. So these numbers just keep getting crazier every year that we keep making the playoffs and making some deep runs. And then going back to Grundy, we've faced off against Grundy Center in the playoffs 5 times total. Like I said, we lost to them 19-7 in the 86 title game. We lost to them 14-7 in the 88 semis. That'd be Kevin Sanger's senior year. We lost to them in the first round of the 2015 playoffs, 24-16. And then we finally beat them in the 2019 title game, 21-7. And then last year, of course, we lost to them in the quarterfinals in Britt, 20-14. We've been outscored by them 65-94. So all close games. The 12-point loss was the largest loss, and our 4-point win was our biggest win, obviously. So 5-5 all time against them, including regular season. We've had one game in the pre-Sanger era back in 1960. We played them in Grundy and won that game to even out the series 5-5. So this is not only the rubber match in the playoffs of the last 3 years, it's the rubber match overall in the total history of Grundy Center versus Britt / West Hancock. So, and I just wanted to throw out there too, before we forget, Kevin Sanger is getting inducted into the Hall of Fame. He was supposed to be inducted last year, but this thing called COVID happened and they canceled all those things, the extra things besides the games. So he didn't get to be honored last year, but he will this year, and that'll be Friday, I believe, in the middle of the day. There's 3 or 4 games that day. It's in between, I think, after the 4A game or at halftime of the 4A game. I can't remember, but that'll be exciting for the Sangers to be a part of. Prediction time, fellas. Like we were talking earlier, we're all going to pick West Hancock to win, obviously. We're homers. We'd be pretty horrible people to say, I think we're going to lose this game, but it's more or less, obviously no disrespect to Grundy Center that we're all picking West Hancock. I'm just more worried, what do you think the score might be and the why behind us getting our 4th championship. Again, no disrespect to Grundy. It's just obviously we wouldn't pick against our team. So Kevin, I put you down to go first. So
Gee, thanks, buddy.
I'll probably just split the difference between what you two pick and make myself look smart.
Well, I'm going to predict that we're going to play 21 overtimes, and at the end of 21 overtimes, we're all just going to throw up our hands and go home. But that's probably not the case. I think it comes down to defense. So whichever defense is going to come out and play the game the way they played all season long, I think there's a slight advantage to West Hancock on that. I could be Lee Corso and pull out my Spartan hat right now, but I'm not going to do that. I think it's going to be a close game, though. I do, and I think it'll be a low-scoring game just because of the quality of the defenses. As far as actually predicting a score, I'm going to say like a 2-point conversion is going to make the difference in this game. Maybe it's a 16-14, 22-20, something like that. But I would go with the red and white. And those people back home are going to hang me in effigy, I suppose, but that's the way I'm going to go.
What about you, Jay? I get to go last. It's my podcast, so.
Sure. You just want us to give you a yeah, Tom.
You gave 2 different scores. You didn't really help me.
I'm going to say 84-82. No, I went back and forth on this. first off, like keys to the game, I think one of the keys I talked about earlier is Wes Hancock. How do we play defense when Kanawha scrambles to throw, not scrambles to run, but scrambles to throw, making sure we don't give up a big play in the pass game, because I think that's where he's most dangerous. He's going to get some yards just scrambling. That's going to happen. He's a really good football player, but it's those big plays. That's what I worry about the most in this one. And then the other factors, and you hate to say it, but turnovers and penalties could play a huge role in the outcome of this game. People don't always think of penalties playing a huge role, but untimely penalty, that's one of those what if scenarios that happen in games that can lead to good or bad for your team. I'm going to go Wes Hancock 20-14. That's kind of the score that keeps popping in my head. I know that was the score last year that Grundy Center beat us by. So I'm going to flip that score around. Wes Hancock wins 20-14. I've went back and forth, but I think that a team that scores 3 touchdowns wins this game. I just don't see either one of these defenses. It's going to be really hard to score 3 touchdowns on this defense. So the team that does get 3 scores, that's who I've got as the winner. So I'm going to go Eagles 20-14. Dan?
I'm going to go back and say one thing. We clearly have the 2 best teams in Class A in the championship, in my mind.
For sure.
Far and away, just because of the defensive prowess of both those teams and their ability to take, Grundy Center's only loss was to Dyke New Hartford, and they just played in the state semifinal. Mm-hmm. So, they're the real deal, and this is going to be a fun game.
Yep. And I think, you said whoever scores 3 touchdowns is going to win. I think one of those 3 touchdowns is going to come from a defensive play, whether it's a pick 6 or a fumble recovery. I think the defense is going to create some offense or create some short fields. But I agree with you said, though, like a false start that creates a 1st and 15 is going to be really hard for either team to overcome in a series to try to get another first down that leads to a score. So,
but I think of the penalties more so, like you said, on the offensive side of football, because it's going to be hard enough to move the ball against either one of these defenses. If you put yourself behind the chains, you're making it even harder on yourself. So playing clean football, especially offensively, as far as procedure penalties, false starts, holding, things like that, that's going to have a major outcome in this game.
Yeah. And this is going to be one of the first teams we play that has as much playoff experience as we do. So the story I'm going to tell talks about how our kids are just pretty even-keeled and pretty level-headed and just business-like. But it's hard to say that's a huge advantage for us because Grundy's been here, done that as well. But last Thursday, I rode up to the game with Rick Sanger, and I just one more excuse to tell this story because it was a great day. But I rode up with Rick, and he helps coach. And we had to be there extra early for pictures and obviously pregame and all that stuff. And we got there right when the team did. And I was like, I'll just kind of hang out in the car or whatever until the gates open at 9. And Rick's like, oh, just walk in with us. It'll be fine. You're a friend of the program or whatever you want to call it. So I went down to the locker room area in the dome with the team and the coaches and just kind of sat outside where they were doing stuff. And guys were kind of getting their ankles taped right near me and stuff. And man, it was business-like. I didn't sense any nerves. I didn't sense getting too excited. I just felt like those guys we're here on a mission. We're here to take care of business. And for me, it was fun too, because I hadn't been a part of that for 15 plus years. But man, I had a really good feeling about how the game was going to end up. And like I said, when it was 8-0 at halftime, I'm like, might as well be 24-0 the way I was, what I noticed that morning and how those guys were kind of conducting their business. So again, I'm going obviously Wes Hancock to win it, and I do think it's going to be a close game. I was also thinking that 20-14 range, but that'd be lame of me to give the exact same score. So we've been going for 2, not kicking a lot of extra points. So I'm going to go with 22-14 Wes Hancock. So it didn't change it a whole lot, but I do think we get a couple 2-point conversions. I think they figure us out on at least one of them, but one of those scores for sure is going to be dictated by a big defensive play or a big defensive stop. I don't see either team having 3 80-yard drives in a game to win the game. There's going to have to be a big play that's going to have to happen for the winning team to come out on top. And like I said, I think that'll be Wes Hancock. So yeah, and again, no disrespect to Grundy, we're obviously going to pick Wes Hancock. I don't want to, like we said, give any bulletin board material. No, everyone knew who we're gonna pick, but Kevin, this Thursday will be your 100th game broadcasting Eagle football on KIOW. Happy 100. It's kind of like the Wilt Chamberlain picture when he scored 100 points. It's pretty much the exact same thing. So we just wanted to congratulate you for 100 straight games. That's
what you need to use for the screenshot for when you preview the podcast on the Facebook and YouTube.
If I knew how to do that, I would. It just whatever pops up, pops up. So yeah. So in those 100 games, Kevin, you've seen a ton of great football. But your first season actually started in not such great football. That was our 0-9 season in 2013, August 30th, 2013 at Garner Hayfield Ventura. But besides that season, you've seen at least one playoff game every season. You have a 70-29 record broadcasting West Hancock football games. And again, that includes that 0-9 season. So you take that out, and that record's really impressive. You've seen 13 playoff wins to 6 losses, and this will be your 20th playoff game. So of those 100 games, 20 of them were playoff games, which we've talked about how these kids have a whole extra year of experience with all this, these extra playoff weeks they've had. So pretty cool accomplishment. Kevin, what can you say about 100 games doing Eagle football?
It's been a fun experience. I started that, like you said, in the 2013 season. We had a lot of close games that year that we didn't win. It started with Jim Becker. They came to me. I had been doing the PA announcing for baseball, softball, and started with baseball, moved over to softball, and then had filled in for the legendary Denny Brum when he had to be gone for football. And they started a new radio station that was licensed out of Britt, and they came to me and asked me if I'd be interested in doing West Hancock football play-by-play, and I said sure. And if I could get the right I actually requested that Jim Becker come along and be my color guy, and he was with me for the first 2 years. And then after Jim passed away, I brought Jay on board, and he's been with me ever since. And we've had a lot of fun. I enjoy the heck out of it. It's not really, don't consider myself a professional by any means doing this job. But we just have a lot of fun. We make it fun for the listeners. We try to anyway. And if you remember Gary Gerstad, who was a great Eagle fan and was also blind, and he was a good friend of mine. And I always considered that I was describing the game to Gary. And if Gary could understand what was happening on the field, and we used to communicate after I'd get a Saturday morning email from Gary after every broadcast, especially when we first started, we were just on the radio before we had the live stream, and we would talk about the game. And he was always complimentary about, his ability to tell what was going on from what we were describing. And that was one of the things that I took as not really being a radio guy and had no formal training. I just wanted to always thought that, describe the game as though you were describing it to someone who couldn't see it. Mm-hmm. And that's what we've tried to do. And Jay makes it easy. Jay makes it fun. We get lots of good feedback from our listeners, and you're helping out with the statistics makes everything all that much easier for us. And like I say, this has been a fun ride, and I really enjoyed doing it.
Yeah, I love it. Like, I so look forward to the fall. And then I was telling Holly Lang, I was sitting next to her and John at the game on Thursday, and I said, if I were to print out the Facebook Messenger conversation that the three of us have had over the last 4 years now or whatever it is, that we would have killed several trees just to print out those conversations. We talk a lot of football throughout the week. We have fun doing our predictions, and I send you guys dumb, sometimes weird, obscure stats and just the basic stuff that, just kind of fun and all that stuff. But I really appreciate you guys.
got to tell you a funny story that happened. I think it was the second year that Jim and I did it when we first started. We were playing Denver in a playoff game here at West Hancock, and they had a huge offensive line.
They
And,
had some team.
Yeah, they did. And Jay was kind of our sideline reporter back then. He was feeding us scores and keeping us up to date on whatever was happening around the area and stuff. But sometime during the game, I might even have been in the pregame, and he kind of caught me off guard because I didn't know he was going to do it. Jim looked over at me and he says, Kevin, he says, this Denver offensive line's got more beef in it than the Corwith locker. And I just about busted out laughing right on the air because, he caught me off guard. And so we've had a lot of fun over the years. Jay told the story here on one of our other podcasts about, falling off the chair at Alta, or actually Aurelia, I believe it was. And just had some funny things. That first year that we were on the air, we were 0-13. We had one game where we played up at Lake Mills, and it just was terrible thunderstorm evening. And on the way up there, the radio station got hit by lightning.
Oh.
And we couldn't broadcast our normal. We didn't even think we were going to get to do a broadcast because they couldn't patch us through to the board. And Tony, the owner of the station, was there, and he gets on the phone with us and he says, I'll tell you what, guys, he says, we're going to do this old school. He says, you won't be able to throw it back to us for commercials, but we're going to get you on the air. And he took the phone that we had called in on and taped it to the microphone on the board with duct tape. And we broadcast for 2.5 hours without being able to throw it back to the station for a commercial. And that was interesting. Jay, it wasn't, that was Jim and I, but I don't know what we talked about, but we made up stuff and made up our own commercials as we went because we couldn't throw it back to the station.
Nice. Yeah. And I know so many people appreciate you guys, me included. For people who can't get to the games in person, the live stream and the radio is a great option. And I think it was the quarterfinal game, you were saying people from 40 different states and 4 different countries were listening or watching. Just unreal how devoted West Hancock fans are, whether they're in the area or outside of the area. And there are a lot of people that don't miss a game and that they really appreciate you guys. So I just wanted to mention that. Happy 100th.
Thank you.
I think that's a bigger accomplishment than Wilt Chamberlain's 100-point game back in the day. So, impressive. So, all right. Anything else you guys want to throw out there before we wrap it up?
No, happy 100 to Kevin. It's been a really good run, and here's to another 100 more. And we're, like Kevin said, we're very fortunate to be able to do it. We have a great time. I mean, we have so much fun doing it. Like halftime, I think of it as just 2 buddies watching a football game, and it happens to be broadcast to thousands of people every Friday night. But that's really what it is. 2 buddies trying to keep it clean on the radio and broadcasting a football game. Go back to the program and Coach Sanger and company and all the players and kids and parents and communities that are involved. We're really, really, really fortunate to be able to not only do this, but it makes it really easy and really enjoyable because of the product that's on the field. When you're winning and you've got kids and families and communities like we've got, it makes it really, really easy and really, really enjoyable. So we're 2 of the luckiest guys in Britt, because I'm sure there's a number of people that would love to be sitting in the press box having the view that we get every Friday night.
Yeah, I concur.
Yep. All right. Thanks as always for watching and listening to these podcasts. We'll hopefully see you at the Dome at 1:00 this Thursday, November 18th. West Hancock versus Grundy Center for the Class A state championship. Go Eagles.
Go Eagles.